You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. In his latest book, Wake Up and Open Your Eyes, author McLeod Chapman imagines a world where demonic forces lurk in the ether of social media and rolling news. Clay joins me to discuss the themes of the book and his previous work, along with some of his inspirations and loves in the horror genre. But before that, of course, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/Mysteries and Monsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes, guaranteed early releases, bonus content, and more. And you can click the link in the show notes as always. Thank you to Jim, my latest patron, and thank you to each and every one of you that continue to support the show with your contributions. You can find Mysteries and Monsters across most social media platforms. Please subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters channel on YouTube. You can also visit mysteriesandmonsters.com for news and episodes, and our exclusive merchandise site with TeePublic is available too, and the link's in the show notes as well. Our intro and outro music are performed by the marvellous Weary Pines. Thank you as always to Dean Bestall for his marvellous artwork, and the show is produced by Mr. Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys. Now, Clay awaits us and urges us to wake up and open our eyes. My guest on this episode is fast becoming an essential author in the horror genre. In Clay McLeod Chapman's latest book, a nerve-shredding horror that infuses conspiracy theories, possessions, and the quest to stay sane when the rest of the world seems to be going to hell in a handcart. Clay, welcome to Mysteries and Monsters.
Wow, how am I going to live up to that introduction? That's amazing. Thank you.
You are very welcome. I was mentioning before we started the interview proper, Clay, I've been looking forward to this for 3 years, not just because I think you're a damn fine author, but I interviewed you 3 years ago and my laptop decided that for whatever reason it didn't want you to appear on my show, and I lost it and it all went corrupted. So I am, as we say here in Yorkshire, chuffed to bits to get a chance to speak to you on the back of your latest release, which has come out in the last couple of months. So thank you for fitting me into your hectic schedule.
Oh my God, see, your laptop was trying to protect you. It was doing you a favor, but you didn't listen. You got to listen to your laptops.
Yeah, well, that's always been my problem, Clay. I think I never listen to sage advice, I think. So you are a man who I've been aware of for quite a while, Clay, because obviously one of my passions is Marvel Comics, and so I'm aware of some of the work you've done on Iron Fist and Carnage and other titles. You've written for the Creep Show periodicals with, the debutante story you did, I think was Creep Show 5, was one hell of a party to. I was very glad I wasn't invited to that particular event.
Thanks for reading it. That's so sweet. I love that story. It was so much fun to do.
Yeah. And, you've done a bit of script work. You've had a few adaptations. I caught your film Wendell and Wild, which was produced by Jordan Peele, who is someone who has fast become a fan of your work as well, Clay.
Yeah. Well, not only produced it, but he co-wrote it. He starred in it. He was all over Wendell and Wild. So, honestly, wherever Jordan goes, if he says, hey, you want to do this? The immediate answer from me is yes.
Absolutely. I think after his burgeoning film career has continued, he's one of those directors these days that as soon as I see his name attached to something, I'll check it out regardless, I think, because he's someone really over the last 10 years who's kind of pushed the boundaries of not only his own career, but he seems to be one of those creators who wants to try and spread his arms around other people in this particular genre, Clay, and help as many as he can. He seems to be quite positive in that regard.
I agree. I think that he, it's so interesting because I think that he has kind of mastered the art of mystery when it comes to his own features, that he kind of shrouds every new kind of feature project in a bit of what's it going to be? Like, he never reveals anything that he doesn't want to until he's ready to. And I really admire that, because I think for the rest of us mere mortals, we're always like, look at me, ready and willing to give it all up on social media. But beyond that, with, as opposed to his own work, I think he really, within Monkey Paw has kind of branched out and expanded and kind of like brought into the fold a lot of other artists that, are really, just trying to kind of tell their own stories. And whether that's through his producing or just advocating, like, I don't know, like he's using his powers for good. Let's put it that way.
Very much so. I think it's quite interesting as well, because he's kind of tackled, in the 3 big films he's had out so far, very different aspects of the horror genre, really. You've got the sort of creeping fear from Get Out, where our hero is caught in the maelstrom of misdirection and sinister manipulators. And then you've got Nope, which for me is one of the freshest takes on UFOs in the last 20 years, I think.
Yeah.
It's really nice to see somebody do a UFO film that's quite different, I think. For me, I think, along with Vast of Night, if you've ever seen that, Clay.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was a nice, fresh, even though Vast of Night's quite a retro-feeling film, it still kind of did something a bit different for things we get these days, where it's usually the typical, oh, look, we're being invaded again type film.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, you've got us where you've got the whole doppelganger imposter syndrome going on. So he's taking sort of standard stories, but he's molding them into a sort of new adaptation for a modern audience. And I think that's one of the strengths you have as a writer as well, is that, as with anything, there are only so many ways you can tell a certain story, Clay. But I think when you have an ability to sort of update it and refresh what on paper may seem like a tired concept, it quickly becomes apparent that we can sort of revitalise some of these old-fashioned ideas and stories by picturing them through a modern lens, be that social media or the world around us or the changes in science that have occurred in the last 20 years. There's a lot of scope for that kind of field, isn't there?
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And, I feel like particularly with the horror genre, there is this idea that, the metaphors we use, the monsters we kind of utilize, there's a kind of an elasticity to them, where every decade or every generation, there can be a kind of that refresh button that you're speaking of. And of course, I'm thinking like specifically of like something like the zombie metaphor or the vampire metaphor, or even like the pod person body snatcher metaphor. We have these kind of tried and true stories that evolve every generation as either technology evolves or our personal kind of understandings of we're just where culture is, frankly. And I love that. I mean, I think that, for me, the demonic possession trope, that story was one that was kind of ripe for a retelling, because I feel like, the Exorcist films have kind of been in a bit of a stasis for nearly 50 years, given the fact that there was The Exorcist, and then everything subsequently has kind of followed a familiar pattern, short of a few kind of like really strong outliers. But if I see another film with a Catholic priest trying to like extract some demon from a teenage girl, I feel like I might throw in the towel.
It is strange sometimes. I mean, it was quite amusing. Sometimes these happen, and I've spoken to other authors as well as filmmakers in the past, Clay, where you may write 2 things a year apart, and the way scheduling works out, sometimes you end up with 2 books coming out in a month of each other. And Russell Crowe ended up playing a priest. Obviously, one film he was playing an actor playing a priest, which was a strange diversion, but essentially had 2 films where he was a priest battling demons almost back to back, but they were filmed 3 years apart. So
I love that. I honestly, for I think taking the Pope's Exorcist, and then was the second one The Exorcism?
Yes.
It was something very kind of like Blink, and you might confuse it for The Exorcist.
Yes.
But I don't know. Like if all Russell Crowe wants to do from here on out are Exorcist films, I say let the man cook.
Well, he's certainly got the persona to carry it, and regardless of the film around him, you're always usually guaranteed a good turn from Mr. Crowe.
I mean, that guy, he has entered a phase in his career where, I think letting him have fun and just kind of sinking his teeth in, I applaud him. I appreciate it. I'm actually more excited to see current, Russell Crowe films than say Gladiator or whatever his kind of Oscar fare was kind of way back when.
Yeah. Well, he seemed to go through that same period that Tom Hanks did in the 90s, where it was like, well, is he going to win it again this year? You have that like trio of great films like Hanks had in the 90s, where I think you had Master and Commander, and then A Beautiful Mind, and
just the boxing one. I can't.
Cinderella Man.
Cinderella Man. There you go.
Great film. I didn't know anything about that. Obviously, it's a true story, and so it's one of those films that I was like reading about it as I'm watching it, and I'm thinking, bloody hell, that guy was a monster he was fighting. Good on him. I suppose when you work in this genre, you have sort of, as I said in the introduction, Clay, you've really built a reputation over the last sort of decade in regards to the short story novellas that you do. You do collections, and obviously you've done novels. I'm a big fan of Whisper Down the Lane, which was a very intriguing story, which kind of harks that wonderful sort of juxtaposition between the past and the present day, and intertwining this situation and this horrible turn of events that occurs, and then sort of the ramifications and repercussions of A Little White Lie come home to roost 30 years later.
Yeah.
One of the things I really love about your work is that you seem to be able to very smoothly navigate these intricate sort of jumps in scenery and timescales in regards to this. And obviously with your latest book, Open Your Eyes, you've got this wonderful kind of situation which, yes, we've got demonic possession under there, but everything else, it's wrapped in reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the kind of thin veil of metaphor within Wake Up and Open Your Eyes, I as vulgar and as grotesque of a book as it is, I feel as if there is a version of this book where you take out the demons, take out the possession, take out anything that is remotely supernatural, and you still have the kind of same structure, the same story, the same, the beats remain. And it's just because here in the States, we're dealing with this kind of shifting in ideologies by way of where we get our information from. And it's terrifying because you can see people kind of transition from one kind of mode of thinking to a completely different one, over the course of like 2, 3, 5, 10 years. But it's happening more and more that it is, who needs demons when you've just got, the news?
Well, yes. And I think it's one of those things that a lot of us, well, certainly my personal circle, Clay, I'm not too sure about yourself, but a lot of us seem to be sort of stepping away from it because it's becoming so relentlessly interfering with our day-to-day lives. And I'm sure it's the same in the States as it is here in the UK. The amount of times you have to sidestep some gormless twerp wandering along the sidewalk or the pavement, just staring at their phones. I always think, I don't think you're that important to be staring at your phone, because if you were, you wouldn't be living around here. And sometimes I think the addictive, overpowering quality of these tailored feeds that we all get now can often be underestimated. And I think it's one of those things that governments and legislators have attempted to try and deal with it, but as with anything, it seems to me that it's a case of shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted, and the social media horse is off and away down the hill.
Yeah. And I think it has a lot to do with desirability, like consumer desire. That we could probably, if we all pulled together, we could catch that horse and bring it back into the stable. But I think just a few too many of us, and I put myself in this category too, like we choose not to. And I think ultimately that most people kind of vote with their wallets. They vote with their actions. Like it's funny how innately, like, the choice is kind of still within us. But it's so hard to, like, put my phone down. Like were I given the choice to, like, do you want to spend some time, reading a book, or one last time, just one more time? I would. It's hard to say no for that dopamine rush.
It is. I mean, this is the thing with Wake Up and Open Your Eyes as well. If you'd have written this book 20 years ago, people would say, I would suspect, that it would be considered by some as far-fetched, Clay. And yet, now, it seems perfectly normal. Do you find that surprising or terrifying?
It's funny because I started this book kind of in earnest at the end of 2022. And, I was writing within, here in the States, the Biden administration. And what I was kind of responding to was the kind of previous presidency. And I was kind of under the impression that we were moving forward in this way of kind of our ideology leaning more towards democratic, kind of left-leaning individuals. But I was completely oblivious and kind of, like, unaware, like, just kind of ignorant to that kind of sentiment that was kind of simmering. It wasn't even the silent majority as much as it was just a very, outsourced, beyond the kind of realm of my own algorithms or my own feeds or my own kind of personal purviews or my neighbors. We live in these separate realities, and I think it's just kind of terrifying that this book was supposed to be a kind of like an artifact. It was supposed to be something like almost quaint in its presentation, where whoever reads it could be like, oh, isn't this cute? Like, I remember when life was like that. And yet the book comes out smack dab in the middle of this new epoch for those of us in the States. And it's just such a strange and frankly kind of terrifying time to be putting out this book. So I'm kind of like turtling my experience, like kind of hiding in my shell as much as possible.
Well, the joy of being an author means you can hunker down in that bunker for quite a while and just blame it on work.
Yeah. But these days we have to sell the damn book. We have to try to convince other people to buy the book. So,
well, it's that kind, it's that akin to a zombie apocalypse. Somebody's got to go out there and get the water for everybody, Clay.
Yes, I am the water fetcher. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just the water fetcher.
I mean, it is intriguing though, like you touched on there. I think often people can feel that they're quite well connected to the world around them, but even regardless of which side of the political divide you're on, everybody's in a bubble, whether they know it or not, because of the media outlets they follow, the entertainment celebrities that they follow, the shows they watch. Social media, if anything, I don't think a lot of people have said, well, we've never been more connected, but I think for a lot of us, we've never been as distant as well, because it's pushed us all into little segments. And rather than having the one thing I think often works in these kind of situations and allows these sort of conspiracy ideas to fester and infect others around them. And you could say that about all kinds of things. This is not just a political persuasion thing. There are all kinds of conspiracies that can just seem to have a life of their own, Clay, as I'm sure you're aware. Is that often I think we're quite surprised at how a lot of these ideas are sort of there, and the fact that social media has sort of segregated us all into these things means that a lot of us aren't really aware of it until something sort of crosses over into the sort of mainstream or into our little bubble that we've built for ourselves on the social media networks by the choices we've made and how the algorithm displays these things. Because I remember, I don't know, about a year ago, I suddenly noticed loads of things about chemtrails on my social media. And I thought, hang on a minute, have I got a time machine to 1996 again here? What am I missing here? And people taking pictures of the back garden, and this was in the UK as well. People taking pictures out of the back garden going, look at all these chemtrails spraying us. They're all spraying us. And I was absolutely gobsmacked. And there's like 3 or 4 people who I'd followed who had never sort of indicated any conspiracy theory belief or sharing of these kind of ideas. We're all going, yeah, I've got him here. And I was like, despite the fact that I deal in weirdness on a regular basis doing this show, Clay, and speak to people looking for hairy monsters and sea serpents and chasing ghosts around darkened halls on a night, even I was taken aback, because sometimes you forget that just because I'm not aware of it doesn't mean somebody else isn't all in on it.
Yeah. But isn't that amazing? That like I find that to be the kind of like the durability of conspiracy theories, that there are these things kind of go in cycles where chemtrails can have their moment, and they most certainly did. And then they kind of lay dormant for a little while. And then there's this kind of a flare up where, one person posts one thing and then several other people kind of like catch on to it, and then they share it. And then all of a sudden you've kind of revived this long dormant conspiracy theory. And it becomes fresh anew because more people are exposed to it, or different people are exposed to it. And I don't know. I find that utterly fascinating. And I feel like there are some pretty insidious, nefarious versions of that, where you think of like, depending on your conspiracy theory, it can be either anti-Semitic or, like the older the theory, the conspiracy, the kind of root, like deeper rooted it is in kind of our own pathologies. And, some of those roots go to some pretty dark places.
It is, and it shows the power of them, because a lot of them you would suspect. I mean, I recently did an episode talking about urban legends, which also sort of touched on some conspiracy theories. And the lady I spoke to is an academic from Canada called Gail DeVos, Clay.
Uh-huh. And
we were talking about a famous urban legend, which is the hair-raising rabbit, the story of a family pet that comes home with a dead rabbit in its mouth. The owners are mortified. They take it back to the neighbour and they put it back in the hutch. And then a couple of hours later, they hear all this screaming because that rabbit they buried in their garden has somehow dug its way out and got in the cage again.
Yeah.
And she was saying she told that story in 1988 on Canadian radio. And I saw somebody trying to pass that story off as it happened to me last year on a social media page. And somebody said, oh, no, this has happened to me. And then all these people were showing, because over here there was like 2 shows in the UK that had used that as a plot point in a sitcom. And it's so well established. And we were saying, even Gail was saying, I'm amazed that one's still going 35, 36 years ago after I mentioned it on the radio, because you would think everybody's heard it. But especially in social media circles, you see things like that. They just, ironically, seem to have a life of their own, a bit like this dead rabbit. And it's still going strong out there somewhere. There'll be somebody somewhere around the world telling that story as if it's happened to them.
That is the durability of narrative, of storytelling, man. I tell you, it is it's a beautiful thing sometimes.
I suppose when you're creating the scenarios, especially for this one, was it surprising how easily it seems to be based in reality? As you joked earlier, even if you take the demon possession and things out of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's I need to confess this, and I'm very open about this. Like, for me, in writing this book, it was kind of creating 2 lists at kind of separate sides of the same page. And on one side, it was making a list of the kind of steps of demonic possession. Every movie, a lot of books, they always have that kind of priest who spouts off the kind of the rules of possession. And it's like step 1 is infestation, and step 2 is, obsession, and,
Yep.
3, 4, 5, 6, like all the way to the end, which is the final phase is possession. And, it's a trope. It has kind of like ossified itself into like demonic possession lore, at least for, I think probably both for, fiction and ostensibly what people consider nonfiction. And then, so that was on one side of the sheet. And then on the other, it was just radicalization. Like, let's look at what are the steps or the phases of an individual succumbing to radicalization through news, social media, Baby Shark, you name it. And, by doing those two lists at kind of opposite ends of the same page, maybe not one for one, but pretty darn close, you could just draw a straight line from one side of the page to the next. And it just fit. Demonic possession and social media radicalization are almost like one of the same. And it was just kind of confounding. It was just like jaw dropping to just kind of see it kind of laid bare like that, where it's just like, that is, in fact, that's the story right there.
It is. I suppose you could draw a complete parallel between possession and radicalization, really. They're very similar things.
They are. I think that's the book. That's the, like, I just wanted to, for me, it was just, why, has anyone ever done this before? Has anyone just taken kind of like the demonic possession trope and kind of adhered it to where we are in our kind of national crisis here in the States, and just, speaking specifically to that notion of family members, people and have loved and grown up with, suddenly becoming completely different people, seemingly overnight, even though it's so insidious that it could take like a year, 2 years, 3, 10. And I want to stop short of saying the book wrote itself, but it definitely, the groundwork was laid bare by way of just all of the information matching up to the metaphor. And I loved that. I loved it.
Well, it's not a massive leap from virus infecting software or something like that for me, Clay, reading the book, to see something like an electronic demon using it in that way. And I know you would always have these kind of films in the 80s that would sort of dance around these kind of things, very B-movie stuff where, people would get rock stars being electrocuted on stage and then living in your electricity supply. It's kind of like the modern interpretation of that, because obviously back then, when you had a computer, you basically had to build a massive stand in the corner of your room, and your printer was as big as a wardrobe back in the 80s for a lot of people.
I love it. I love, you're speaking my language. Like, I'm remembering, there's two films that immediately come to mind. And in the 80s, I think it was like maybe 88, there was a film called Pulse. Not to be confused with the Japanese J-horror.
Yeah, great film.
But it was like, there's like an electric current, like a pulse that like infiltrates this family's house. And it ends up kind of like manipulating anything that's electric within the house in order to kind of like terrorize and ultimately kind of like murder the family that lives there. And it's like a little boy and his dad. And the movie is so kind of abstract because, the monster is quite literally just an electric pulse. Like, you just see these little like flickers of electricity, and that's it as far as, having a monster or having the kind of face of the devil. And there's a part of me that, like, I remember watching it as a kid and just feeling really kind of like, I respect its kind of ambiguity or its kind of abstraction, because most of the movies you would see back then, it would be like Freddy Krueger, or, the monster was kind of very easily identifiable and like kind of up at the forefront of the film.
Yes.
And then there was Ghost in the Machine.
Yeah.
Which I think was it was in the 90s, right?
Mm.
And then Brain Skin. I mean, gosh, there's so many. Yeah, that was a good era of there's something coming into your house through the internet.
Mm. Yeah, and I think it's kind of that modern adaptation with these kind of things, because there's always been this kind of technology will try and kill us eventually, be it a truck that comes to life or a car that's possessed, such as Christine or something. Whereas anything that seemed to be computer-based was always set in the far-flung future, I think. You think of 2001 and Hal deciding that he doesn't like the people that he's having to work with. And the little things like they don't realise he can lip read and things like that. It's such a clever book and a film, really. And you think how old that is now. It's coming up to 60 years soon, as well as the book. And you think, oh, well, those kind of things happen. And then you look now and you would say the majority of homes are connected to the internet either by our phones or by a Wi-Fi, wherever. A lot of us only watch television on a streaming service. It has become, in 30 years, integral to the vast majority of people, especially in the Western world, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I'm ashamed to admit, like, if, how much my personal world will just come crashing if I'm without my phone or my computer. Like, just yesterday, I couldn't turn my phone on because it was, unbeknownst to me, it was rebooting and kind of uploading a new, updating its software. And all I saw was that it was just off. And I kind of reverted back to this kind of Cro-Magnon, like, it was just the monkey kind of like banging my fist against the screen. Like, why won't this work? And this was in the scope of like 10, 20, 30 seconds. And I'm just saying, and like, once it kind of rebooted itself kind of automatically on its own, I breathed the sigh of relief. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's all it was. But like, for that brief moment, I was just utterly lost. And I mean, like, it's just astounding. Like, I was like, how am I going to like tell my wife that I can't call? I'm going to be like, I was just doomsdaying myself because I just didn't have my phone. And that's 30 seconds. Don't tell me like what 3 hours is going to be like, 30 days. Like, it's just like, I would not be able to survive the zombie apocalypse without my phone. I wouldn't be able to survive the zombie apocalypse, period.
Yeah, you would be that chap who would get out of the cellar saying, I need my charger.
Yep.
And that's it. There goes Clay. He was a good lad.
Done. I fetched you water. I was fetching you your charger, and this is what happened.
This is the thanks I get for putting my life on the line. But it is remarkable, and when I was reading the book, there are so many parallels you can see in the world around us about how quickly this can take hold and just seem to turn people. And obviously, you've got this nuclear family, this pretty standard set of people who seem to be the flagpole for the story being based around.
Yeah,
Clay, and this kind of what seems like a slow reduction of relationship and conversation. Just when you think things can't get any worse, you suddenly realise it's not just happening to them. It's happening everywhere.
Yeah. And that's the fun of it. Like, I am very fortunate that my editors kind of saved me from me, circumstance where like the core, the middle section, the second phase of this 3-parter, that was ultimately all I wanted to really write. I just wanted to kind of focus on this nuclear family, this family of 4, and watch them kind of individually succumb to their demonic possession through their screens. And, I thought that could be the book. And my editors were basically, they were like, this is really suffocating. You need to open up a window and like look at the rest of the world, like let some air into this book. And that's when we kind of started to kind of speak specifically to the notion of what else is happening, what's happening next door, what's happening across the street, and like who is our guide through all of this. And that was kind of ultimately the genesis for Noah, the character who kind of leads us through parts 1 and 3.
I suppose it's quite telling, actually, because I think a lot of us, if you're caught in some kind of situation such as this, and you can say this about sort of natural disasters, even, you know, with the weather, Clay, that's especially, like I say, once again, in this modern age. 20 years ago, you would hear about a terrible flood or an earthquake or something, and you would read about it on the news, and you'd be thinking, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Now, you have people live streaming themselves trapped in a hurricane or in floods, or there's wildfires, and you just think, on one hand, it is brilliant that people have that ability to make people aware that they're trapped, they're stuck, they're in danger. But also, I think you've also got this aspect that you've got this ghoulish kind of viewership that are out there that are thinking, oh, brilliant, I can watch somebody in absolute terror, because there's no sort of filter on the internet for this kind of thing, especially if you're not, you know, if you're not performing adult material or horrible language about people. Normal life, whether you're in a car crash or a flood or something, that will always navigate these filters. And so people are able to see terrible things, but they're happening to real people, and therefore it's just allowed to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's so... The only answer I have is like, what is happening?
Well, I say that most days, to be honest, these days, Clay, it seems.
Yeah. Isn't it terrifying?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things, because I'm fascinated by situations, and certain situations where people end up being caught in traumatic events and for some miraculous reason manage to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can only think how the world now would deal with a situation like the Boxing Day tsunami in 2004, where very few people had camera phones, if any, really, compared to now, where we can watch people buying a McDonald's that they think, well, I'm going to film myself doing it. Why are you doing this? But you can only imagine the additional scope you get, because whereas before all our ideas and information was kind of through the lens of news media, now everybody has the ability to give us their version of events, their angle of it, their story, rather than, some would say, the sanitized mass media version. And once again, Wake Up, Open Your Eyes is a prime example of that kind of situation, because everybody's got so much connectivity. Something like this has simply got unfettered access to everybody that's susceptible to it. Yeah.
I mean, I do think what the initial value is accountability, that, like, you know, or information, and the kind of silver lining, or the kind of like the rose tinted glass version of all of this kind of technology at our fingertips, is that you could record that flood, you could record that police beating, you could kind of share something that had remained kind of hidden or you know, that could just easily just go under the radar. And that kind of connectivity and kind of community building around, like, the rally cry that, like, we watch this awful video of Rodney King being beaten, pre-cell phone, it was a video camera that did it, but, like, you see the kind of the reaction that our country, the world, had around this awful kind of heinous act. Phones had that and still have that, but just, you know, maybe 20 times, 200 times more are those videos of people sharing their Whoppers at McDonald's. And it just kind of, like, it drowns out the information, the pertinent information, I think. It becomes such a din. And frankly, with, like, Wake Up and Open Your Eyes, that I find it very kind of interesting how one of the things that critically I'm being kind of taken to task for is that, there's no solution, there's no answer, there's ultimately no culprit, there's no kind of like specific moment where the mask is pulled away and we realize it was kind of old man Withers all along.
Yes.
But that doesn't stop people from having opinions on who did it, who's responsible, what this is, whether it's a zombie epidemic, whether it's demonic possession, whether it's some mass hysteria, and to me, that's what social media is. That's what Twitter is. That like you could in fact have the truth, but the truth gets drowned out by everybody else's belief systems and opinions and just the kind of utter deluge of contrasting facts that it kind of negates truth. It negates knowledge, and it just becomes a din. And I wanted the book to kind of emulate that, for better or for worse.
Well, it is, and I think this is human nature as well, because people want a cause, they want a solution, or they want a reason for something happening. And I think often in life things happen and there isn't a reason and there isn't a person behind it. Crap happens to people, sadly, and sometimes you've just got to get on with it and deal with it. And I really quite like that about the book. I like the fact that it was very ambiguous and we're not really sure what's happening, because then you think, what, can it happen again?
Yeah. Oh, it can happen again. It's still happening. It hasn't stopped. It's just, we're all in it now.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite interesting as well, looking at your other latest book as well, Shiny Happy People, because I mean, this is quite a similar thing as well, I think, because you have this kind of situation where our heroine in the book is someone that's been touched by the trauma of drug addiction as a child, Claire.
Yeah.
And then gets to that point in their life where all your friends are taking drugs, because that's what everybody does at that age. Everybody's out partying, doing the scene. And so these kind of things, people always go, oh, and I think if you've never been in that kind of scene or that kind of social circle, for a lot of people, I think that's harder for some people to understand than it is infestation through social media or wherever, because a lot of people think, oh, well, that doesn't happen, that can't go. Kids won't just chuck anything down their own necks. And I'm thinking, well, you'll be very surprised, I think, if you go in any major city, any major country in the world, there will be a group of people taking drugs where most of their friends and family don't know they're doing it, because that's how it works. And it's only usually when their recreational activities take a bigger hold on them that they can't keep it out of the limelight anymore, and it kind of, that's when people start showing the signs of addiction, or their behaviour changes to such a point that people see it. And so looking at this, I was very interested in it, because talking about strange films from the 80s again, I'm always reminded of The Stuff, which was one of the strangest films I remember seeing as a kid. I rewatched it a couple of years ago, and it's still a very good film, I think, because it was quite weird even at that time. As we were saying, I think a lot of people in the 80s just threw stuff against a wall, and if it stuck, they'd make it. Because the thing about that is, the thing that's always made me laugh about this is you've got this white stuff that somebody finds oozing out the ground, and the guy goes, oh, I wonder what that tastes like. And then the next thing, they're selling it in the shop. And you're like, okay, I'm not sure I'd ever be in a situation where I'd see something pouring out the ground, Clay, and go, oh, I wonder what that tastes like.
It is astounding. I love that movie. That movie frankly traumatized me as a child. Yes. I've been very vocal about my childhood having been ruined by Larry Cohen and the stuff. Not even so much the film as much as the trailer for it. I don't know if you had this where you live, but for us, the preview for the film was a kind of public service announcement. The commercial was kind of fashioned in such a way that it was promoting the movie, but done in such a way that it felt like an actual news bulletin warning audience members that there was this item on the shelves of your grocery store that would harm you. And this being the 80s, like there was always like a recall of this product, or like, don't eat that because there's lead in it, or red 40 dye.
Yeah.
And I believed it. Like, for the longest time, I believed that there was this sentient goo masquerading as ice cream in the grocery store shelves. And it terrified the ever-living bejesus out of me. And I loved ice cream.
We did.
Yeah.
But for me, I think that's one of the great things about it is the fact that somebody's got this hip new drug, shares it around, everybody wants some, and within a week or two, everybody's a bit different.
Yeah.
And I always like stories where you've got one or two people who are just surrounded by everybody else being idiots. And because it's one of those situations, I think there are so many great stories over the years where you end up with a central hero or heroine in a situation, and that's why we connect with them, I think, often, Clay, because we've all been in situations in our life where strange things have been occurring around us, or we've been caught in situations. You're like, is everybody else gone mad here? What is going on? Because as you mentioned earlier, it's not just sort of mass hysteria or things like that. And things like that can happen. I mean, as we mentioned one of your previous books, Whisper Down the Lane, which is a lot to do with the satanic panic of the 80s as well. That is a prime example of what can happen, getting to the point where people wanted the Smurf being banned for being satanic. And people laugh about it, but it's there, it happened. You can't erase it as much as people want. And so when you have these situations like Kyra and Logan have to deal with in this one, was this kind of the cousin to Wake Up and Open Your Eyes? Because for me, there seems to be very similar feelings of sensible people surrounded by a maelstrom of shit.
Yeah. I mean, I will say there's an absolute kinship to the two projects. And I think that distant cousins, perhaps, but still, we're still members of the same family. We're on the same family tree. And I think for me, what links them together is this idea of belief systems being kind of perverted or curdled due to either the influence of paranoia or the influence of some kind of external factor, demons or no, that I don't know. Like I grew up during the Satanic Panic era, and now I'm navigating whatever you call this era, the kind of disinformation era. And for me, I've gotten to a place in my life, and it genuinely started with Whisper Down the Lane, where as a writer, I've been given the opportunity to publish these books, write these stories. And to do that, I knew for me, what I had to kind of focus on is this idea of like, put some skin in the game. And that just means like writing about what affects me, like what scares me. And, writing Whisper Down the Lane was about, as a parent who is kind of putting their children out into this world, and then as a child who was kind of growing up during the Satanic Panic era, and just the kind of echoes therein, like that scared me. So I wanted to write about that. And then now with Wake Up, it's it's having family members who are shifting in their ideologies, and that scares me. And just, I have to write about something that I find terrifying, because otherwise it's not gonna terrify the reader.
Have you found, as you've developed, you've been able to let the handbrake off more, or when you drop in your manuscript, do the publishers go, hang on, what on earth's this? What are you doing?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I will confess that I am only as good as my editors, and I've been fortunate to work with some really good editors. I mean, there's like a process of discovery. We have to find the story, or find the way to tell it, and that to me is a process that I don't feel like I can do on my own or do as well on my own. I mean, it's all discovery. It's all navigating and having the wrong idea first and maybe having 5 of them until you get to the right idea. But my editors, I feel like, have always offered feedback, or even beta readers, or, you know, I need to be in a volley with these stories where it's like I give someone a draft and they read it, and then I have a conversation with that person about it. And heaven bless the beta readers, because they're reading the kind of slobbiest, you know, rawest, roughest draft known to man. But through the conversation of like, okay, what's working for you? What isn't working? What do you think the story is? What's this about? That we reach a discovery. I reach a discovery, and I start to understand what the story is. But if I'm left to my own devices and I have to do that alone, I don't think it's as strong.
Well, as with anything, I think if you are sort of squirreled away, hiding away from the reality of reactions from people, I think you don't get perhaps to the story you want to tell anyway, Clay. And often doing that kind of back and forth for any author, I would imagine, allows some people to tighten things up, cut a bit of fat off here and there, and then as if by magic suddenly you think, yeah, now we've got a clear path here. I can see where I need to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just being in conversation with your readers from like the get go. I'm a needy writer. I'll admit it. I need your help.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Do you think that because you work in this field primarily with the stories you've been telling over the last few years, Clay, that because it's horror, it gives you more of an ability to entwine social commentary alongside dark, terrifying things to create a more realistic portrayal of that? Because I think, certainly in my opinion, the horror books I've read over the last decade are certainly far more nuanced and more focused on the storytelling rather than perhaps some I grew up as a teenager where you would have the big bad or the bogeyman at the centre of it. Whereas these days it seems that the more technology we get and the more aware of the world around us we are, the more things we discover that terrify us, really. Yeah.
I mean, it is funny how it's such a double-edged sword, because like I do think we are, I mean, horror in particular has been a great vehicle. Horror has always been political. It is the most durable and resilient genre to kind of speak to these issues in a palatable way that makes them kind of fun and engaging. And, you know, there's something so deceptive about it, because if you put Godzilla in it, you know, you can talk about the nuclear bomb or kind of like modern day nuclear warfare in a way that if there wasn't Godzilla, you probably wouldn't have as many people watching it. And it's the kind of the deceptive quality of these metaphors, these monsters, where you incept your message, you plant the seed, and then that audience member, that reader, they go home and then they're left to just think about it. And that's when the real kind of payload hits, and whatever their mind, whatever their imagination, whatever their thought process is, like they start to kind of ruminate on what the movie was either speaking of indirectly or directly. And that's when it really hits. That's when it really resonates. And I love that. I love that about horror. Some are a little bit more obvious and a little more blatant, and some hit you over the head, and some are maybe a little bit more subtle about it. But like, you know, it's such a wide open genre that I think that's the joy of it. And, you know, speaking specifically to someone like Jordan Peele, like, you know, he just goes to show that, like, even in this day and age, like, there is great value to utilizing horror to do something a little bit more, and you have a fun time doing it.
Yeah. Did you find it difficult dealing with satire? Because I think this is the other thing that often gets overlooked in the horror field is there's often a dark vein of humour that runs through a lot of stories that people tell, Clay. And I think sometimes just to ground it, because even in the most challenging of circumstances, many of us who have had difficult times in our life will remember the points that made us laugh when it seemed like everything was going wrong. Yeah. But is it a difficult challenge to navigate that boat through those waters without sort of falling too far into one side of satire and making it more of a satirical comedy that's got horror elements rather than it should be a horror story that's got satirical elements?
It's always a fine line. And, I think satire is tough because what one person finds funny, someone else might not. And I think I kind of learn and never learn the lesson long enough. But like the things that I find funny, the majority of people out there in this world probably do not.
Yes.
So I'm speaking to a very kind of limited audience range, and that's okay, But I think satire, the satire that seems to work the best is the sharpest, most acute, and that takes ingenuity and kind of intelligence and a wit of the oh my God, why am I blanking on the author of Dorian Gray? Oh my God,
Oscar Wilde.
Oscar Wilde. My God, what's happening to me? We could all aspire to be Oscar Wilde, but most days I feel like I'm lucky enough to be Joe Rogan.
Well, that's the thing. I think you mentioned that. I mean, that was the thing about Wilde's work, that Dorian Gray is quite a dark, powerful story about the quest for everlasting youth, played through the prism of beautiful people being shits to each other. And then you look at some of his other works, such as The Importance of Being Earnest, which is complete satire from start to finish, but for some people is as equally horrifying because you've got these idiots who seem to have lots of money.
Yeah.
And so whilst Dorian Gray is more your traditional horror story, his other work, because of that dark satire he had and the way he was able to turn a lens on people around him every day, he was able to dress this up as an amusing story when really it was probably more caustic than Dorian Gray, because the people laughing at it didn't realise that they were the butt of the joke.
Yeah. Oh God. And that's the other thing, like one man's horror is another man's comedy and vice versa. Yeah. In writing this book, I was I was kind of leaning into my affinity for Evil Dead 2, which isn't satire at all, but I kind of imagined like what kind of world would we live in if the January 6th riots here in the States were directed by Sam Raimi. And I just thought that bringing a certain kinetic energy to this kind of like terrifying, traumatizing moment in our country's history, and just imbuing it with that kind of level of madness. Yeah, that was the goal.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's a prime example, because I think sometimes with the Evil Dead 2, especially, Clay, people seem to miss a lot of. There are some very dark parts of that film.
Yeah.
Surrounded by all the madcap maelstrom and some very creepy things. I refuse to. Anybody who hears the grandma singing the lullaby and then changing back into the demon, and when you see that when you're 14, it doesn't matter what films you've seen beforehand. There's something strange about something so supposedly soothing being used in such a way to display complete menace, I think, that takes a very normal run-of-the-mill thing to a completely different level that you will never view that lullaby in the same way again, I think.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I feel his work, Sam Raimi's work, is so kind of slyly, like even with the first Evil Dead, which is a much more dour experience than the second one. It does an interesting job of keeping the kind of opaque. I mean, they're nihilistic movies. Like nobody nobody's going to survive these films. Which is why I find the remakes and the sequels of the remakes so interesting, because they lean very heavily into the nihilism, and there is no sense of humor to them. I mean, there's the occasional jibe and kind of callback to the earlier films, but they are utterly of their time, which is to say there is no optimism, no tongue planted in the cheek. That cheek got like punched through by the tongue in '86 when Sam Raimi did Dead by Dawn.
Well, that's interesting, because I'm not a fan of the remade Evil Dead, because I think it's too nihilistic. I think there are moments of pathos in the first one, even though it's very rough and ready, and it stands as a testament to the will of talented people to create something on such a small budget, which is incredible to think what they achieved with what the money they had. But then when I saw Evil Dead Rises, I went in there very kind of, I'm not too sure. I didn't like the remake. The remake was too dark, and I didn't like anybody in it, and people did stupid things in it, which is one of those things, the idiot ball script situation that happens sometimes, where let's make this character do something ridiculous. This woman's clearly possessed, but we're all going to talk to her like she's not. Oh, well, we thought she was dead, and now she's wandering about. Oh, well, I'm sure everything's fine. No, right? Whereas Evil Dead Rises was such a change, I think, in direction, and even though it's quite a darker film, there were still moments of very black comedy in it. Like the bits where people are ringing on the doorbell and they're looking through the eye hole, and she's just running around the corridor picking them off, going, and stuff. And you've got these little nods here and there, where normally in that kind of film they don't stop for breath sometimes. They're so obsessed with trying to be as full on as possible, Clay. I think they miss the little tricks that people like Raimi used to do in the 80s, where you just get that little bit of relief from what you were watching, I think, which you need. Yeah.
It is so, I mean, I don't know if I liked the remake of Evil Dead. It was definitely, it took a position and it went for it.
Yeah.
But in the sequel, Evil Dead Rise, I was just like, oh, this is what I want. This is like the kind of lunacy of it, the kind of like, the all-consuming. I don't know. Like I definitely found myself really appreciating the sequel a little bit more than the remake. But man, oh man, like it is phenomenal how, again, it's like the durability of what that kind of trope, or that kind of like concept that Raimi created, of just the relentless, like nihilistic, like hopeless, like it's just, there's no hope in those movies, and the comedy is there just to kind of like distract you from the fact that like there is no hope.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say, the first 5 minutes of Evil Dead Rise, before we meet the main characters and we have that bit down at that cabin by the river, I was like, Jesus Christ. I was not expecting anything. I never thought I'd ever see somebody get hit in the face with a drone. Yeah. I was like, what? This is... And I was watching it on a Sunday afternoon with the curtains open, and I was still feeling deeply unsettled watching it.
I love it. Love
it. Well, Clay, before I let you go, what's next for you? As we've touched on, you seem to have a finger in about 75 different pies. I don't know how many hands you must have, sir. But you're a prolific author. Like I said, you do short stories, you do collections, you're always contributing to other work, you work in different mediums, you've opened up your sort of skill set across so many genres now, it would seem. What does the rest of 2025 hold for you on top of Wake Up and Open Your Eyes?
It's going to be a pretty busy year, pretty good year, hopefully. In June, I have a graphic novel come out called Seance in the Asylum, which is with Dark Horse. It's a collection of 4-issue, like a 4-issue miniseries that I did, but they're all going to be put together in one trade paperback, which I'm really excited about.
Oh, brilliant.
And then I have a new collection of short stories coming out from Titan Books called Acquired Taste. And that comes out in September. And then in November, Shiny Happy People. I got my first YA book coming out.
Yeah. Well, I'm intrigued to see that. Having seen the synopsis, it looks a damn fine story. I want to find out how Kyra and Logan save the world.
It's going to be a doozy.
So, Clay, thank you so much for your time today. Where can everybody follow your work, find any of the publications that we've mentioned, and keep up to date with everything else you've got going on, sir?
Oh, man. I think I'm doing all of the social media platforms poorly. So pick your poison. Like Instagram, Blue Sky, still on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Threads, whatever whatever one you're on, just find me there and I'll do it poorly.
Fabulous. Well, I'll put links to whatever flavour the audience fancies dipping their toe into along with your website, Clay. And I just want to say thank you so much for your time and your conversation today. It's been a real privilege spending some time in your company as an author. I've got a lot of time for it, and I really enjoy what you do in numerous genres in the writing field, my friend. And I wish you the very best for continued success. And I can't wait to see what nightmare you induce on us further down the lines.
Oh, man. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.